Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 2 must-start and must-sit wide receivers for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, I'm going to be going over at the beginning of the video my must-start wide receivers, then halfway through the video, we're going to pivot into the must-sit wide receivers based upon their matchups in week number 2 of the NFL season. But before we get on to the in-depth breakdown of these wide receivers, I would like to ask if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video to please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, me and the guys over at the Awesemo Fantasy Football YouTube channel put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure you hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I'd also like to ask that if you guys have a Twitter and would like to follow me, I tweet all about fantasy football. Please follow me on there at NotoriousFNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into the video. We begin with my first must-start wide receiver of the week, and that is Julio Jones of the Tennessee Titans going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Now, while you may feel like that's a no-brainer, Nick, it's obvious that you're going to fire up Julio Jones. It may not be so obvious because Julio Jones and this Tennessee Titans offense looked deflated, like a football in New England on Sunday. They looked terrible up against the Arizona Cardinals. Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill, and Julio Jones were complete busts in week number 1. The only player that survived the onslaught of the Arizona Cardinals defense was A.J. Brown because he ended up scoring a touchdown in that game. It wasn't a big game for A.J. Brown, but it wasn't weak losing because he played just about all right, whereas Julio, Derrick Henry, and Ryan Tannehill were basically useless in week number 1. The Arizona Cardinals were all over Ryan Tannehill in that matchup as Chandler Jones sacked Ryan Tannehill 5 total times. The defense just locked the whole offense down, and it was kind of sad to watch because this was a game that I talked up and many analysts talked up as a back-and-forth affair, a tit-for-tat game. One of those games where the teams go shot for shot. Sure, the Arizona Cardinals offense is good, but I believe that the Tennessee Titans offense was good enough to overcome any type of defense from the Arizona Cardinals, but that just was not true. This week they get the Seattle Seahawks, and I would be shocked if Julio Jones had as bad of a game and this whole offense played as bad as they played up against the Arizona Cardinals. Last week, Julio Jones had 3 receptions on 6 targets for 29 receiving yards in that losing effort on Sunday. And like I said, this is bound for a bounce back. The Seattle Seahawks defense looked relatively solid up against the Indianapolis Colts, but that can be attributed to how Carson Wentz, it came back a little bit early, right? If you were looking at the timetable that was speculated for him to return to injury, being back by week number 1 seemed pretty close to not happening. It seemed like that was kind of a long shot for that to happen, but he ends up playing in week number 1. The offensive line does not look very good in Indianapolis, so that is likely why the Colts offense looks stagnant up against the Seattle defense, despite the Seattle defense not being all that great. I do expect Julio Jones to have a huge bounce back, unless this team is just in shambles, unless this team is really having a humongous fall off from the last couple of years. I highly doubt that Julio Jones will not be worthy of a start this week. Next up, we got Diontae Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. Diontae Johnson was one of the focal points, one of the key parts of the Steelers' victory going up against the Buffalo Bills. Despite getting banged up early on in the game, Diontae Johnson ended up returning and playing quite strongly, going 5 of 10 for 36 yards and a touchdown in that game. Now, I know that stat line doesn't look all that good, and I agree, it doesn't look that good on paper, but Diontae Johnson, that touchdown that he scored was key for them to win the game, and he was getting fed the football. This matchup, he's going up against the Las Vegas Raiders this week. The Baltimore Ravens offense pounded the Raiders defense all game long, and then obviously later on in the game, the Raiders offense started to catch up. The Raiders defense looked a little bit sharper, obviously forcing that fumble in overtime on Lamar Jackson, but I think the Pittsburgh Steelers should be perfectly fine in this game, and Diontae Johnson, to me, is the clear number 1 wide receiver on the team. I said that all offseason, why I believe Diontae Johnson was a player that you guys were going to want to be drafting in your fantasy drafts, and I have the same belief now. After week 1, it seems like Diontae Johnson is going to be fed game in and game out by Big Ben Roethlisberger. Last week, we saw Sammy fucking Watkins cook up this Raiders defense. We saw Hollywood Brown play excellent against this defense as well, so I see no way that Diontae Johnson struggles in this game. And normally, Big Ben looks much better at home, and this matchup is in Pittsburgh, so I expect Diontae Johnson to have a solid game this week, and he is a must-start wide receiver. But before we get on into the next must-start wide receiver, I would like to give you guys a quick word from our friends and our sponsor over at Yahoo. Start the NFL season off right with Yahoo Daily Fantasy. To celebrate, we have a brand new exclusive deal thanks to our partnership with Yahoo, where you can get 2 months free of Awesemo Plus Platinum. You heard that right, 2 free months of Awesemo Plus Platinum. To qualify, you need to be a new Yahoo user. Sign up with an account using the link down below in the description. Deposit and play. That is it. Yahoo will send us your name after you play in your first paid contest, and we will reach out to you via email with your coupon. If you need immediate access because you want to play today, email support@awesemo.com. Again, support@awesemo.com, and we will set it up for you today. Just to emphasize, this offer is for new Yahoo users only. If you are already a Yahoo user, then you will not be eligible for this promo once you're signed up. Make sure to enter tonight's single game $100,000 NFL Baller contest. With your 2 free months of Awesemo Platinum Plus, you will have access to our tools and projections specifically designed for Yahoo DFS to help you guys take down those big Yahoo contests and other contests to win big on Yahoo DFS. Take advantage and join Yahoo today. Back into the video. The next must-start wide receiver of the week is Calvin Ridley going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Calvin Ridley is a wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Calvin Ridley looked bad. Calvin Ridley and the Atlanta Falcons looked fucking atrocious up against the Philadelphia Eagles, and there's no way to kind of spin that game in a positive way. At the beginning of the game, sure, you can technically spin it positively because the game started and the Falcons looked pretty good. But then after the first couple of drives, it seemed like they had no idea what they were doing. Matt Ryan was getting pressured heavily, and they could not do anything up against the Philadelphia Eagles. This week, they get the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so I know people are going to be very nervous about Calvin Ridley. But if you look back to Calvin Ridley in the past up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Ridley basically smashes the Tampa Bay Buccaneers every single time they play. Last year, if you combine both of the games up against the Buccaneers, he had 18 total receptions for 218 yards and a touchdown against them last season. So I expect, just like as in years prior, that Calvin Ridley will have a big game up against the Bucs defense, despite the Buccaneers having a very strong defense. Last week up against the Eagles, Calvin Ridley had 5 receptions on 8 targets for 51 receiving yards. And just like with Julio Jones, I expect a bounce-back game here for Calvin Ridley. I would be shocked if Calvin Ridley was one of those second-round picks that you drafted in fantasy football, and he just ends up being a complete bust. He is in a situation that, while isn't the best because Matt Ryan didn't look amazing on Sunday, I expect the team to look a lot better this week up against the Buccaneers. Even if they end up getting blown out, I'm sure Calvin Ridley will be very involved in this matchup. Next up, we have Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers going up against the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. Brandon Aiyuk appears to be stuck in the fucking doghouse for the 49ers, and that makes Deebo Samuel the clear #1 receiving option on the team. The Eagles defense did look good up against the Falcons on Sunday, but again, you can kind of heavily attribute that to the fact that the offensive line looked terrible and the offense as a whole just looked bad. If Aiyuk remains with that low snap count, which is what I believe, and based on everything that I've read, it seems like Aiyuk's going to be in that doghouse. He's not going to be seeing a high snap count. He's not going to be seeing a high target share in this offense. Then Samuel should be a no-brainer start on the week. Obviously, he scored 189 yards last week, or he got 189 receiving yards last week, 1 touchdown, 9 receptions on 12 targets against the Lions. It's inevitable that he is going to have regression, right? It's inevitable that he's not going to finish as high as last week, but he still has the opportunity to finish inside of the top 12 on a 49ers offense that I believe to be relatively strong. And with Brandon Aiyuk being kind of screwed over by maybe Shanahan, maybe he's still a little bit banged up, that really does open up the high amount of upside for Deebo Samuel in this game. Next up, we have wide receiver of my Miami Dolphins, Jaylen, and he waddled away, waddle, till the very next day, going up against the Buffalo Bills. Jaylen Waddle looked excellent in his rookie debut, going up against the New England Deflatriots in New England, going 4 of 6 for 61 receiving yards and a tug, doing all of this up against a very strong Patriots defense, in my opinion. The difference between the Patriots defense in 2021 and 2020 was night and day. In 2020, a bunch of players opted out for COVID. It just wasn't looking all that great. But in 2021, the Patriots defense started off strong, and even despite that, Jaylen Waddle, like I said, got 4 receptions on 6 targets for 61 receiving yards and a touchdown. This week, Will Fuller is returning from that suspension for the PEDs that he acquired last year, which is interesting because now we'll get to see the true pecking order of this team. Will Fuller, Sir Will Fuller the fifth, will he be the lead receiver there? Will it be Waddle? Will it be Parker? I'm interested to see, but I believe if the Dolphins are to fight their way into this game up against the Buffalo Bills, if this is not just a murder by the Buffalo Bills, then the Dolphins are going to have to fight back. That will involve a lot of passing, and that will involve Jaylen Waddle, rookie wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins. Now on to the must-sit section of the video. We begin with Brandon Aiyuk of the 49ers going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. Last week, Brandon Aiyuk was the easiest call to be a must-start last week. The matchup up against the Detroit Lions was chef's kiss. It was beautiful. Magnifique. It was juicy. And the thought process was just wrong. It was just, well, it wasn't really wrong, right? Because everything in your mind told you, hey, this is going to be a high-scoring game. The 49ers scored 41 points in that game, but Aiyuk was not a part of this demolition of the Lions defense. He had 0 receptions on 0 targets for, you guessed it, 0 fucking yards. This is a situation where you should worry about Brandon Aiyuk. You should worry a little bit if you have him. I wouldn't say to go full-on panic, trade him for a used condom, but I would tell you, just don't cut him. Just don't worry. Or worry a little bit, but don't panic. Just sit tight. Maybe a week from now, maybe he blows up here, plays great up against the Eagles. But until we see that big game, I'm definitely going to continue to sit down Brandon Aiyuk. Next up, we have Marquez Callaway of the New Orleans Saints going up against the Carolina Panthers. Marquez Callaway was a player that was screaming up draft boards later on in draft season, late in August. This guy was getting drafted in like the 7th, the 8th round of a lot of drafts, and it was for good reasons, because Callaway was the lead wide receiver on this team in preseason. It seemed like him and famous Jameis Winston had this excellent connection, but at week number 1, they went from having that 5G connection to like one bar up against the Packers. In that demolition of the Packers defense, Callaway had 1 reception on 2 targets for 14 receiving yards, which is terrible considering the high expectations we had for him going into week 1. Now, the best thing to do is just sit him down here up against the Panthers. I would not be surprised at all if Callaway bounced back here big up against the Panthers, because now the Packers, or not the Packers, I should say, the Saints aren't playing a team that was just flopping like a fish. The Packers had no fight in that game. The Packers just rolled over and let the Saints pet their belly. But that's not what's going to be happening here in week number 2, and the Panthers will be able to fight back, and then maybe Callaway will see an uptick of usage. And once we see that, then I'm fine throwing Callaway into my lineup next week. But right now, I want to vote on the side of caution with Marquez Callaway. Before we get on into the next must-sit wide receiver, I would like to let you guys know that if you're looking for season-long fantasy football coverage, then we have you covered. We got that Darrelle Revis level coverage. Our NFL Express weekly pass is available now for $3.95, and it is more expansive than ever and includes access to our brand new trade value tool, strength of schedule tool, and fantasy streaming helper. With that said, you will also get our NFL DFS player and ownership rankings, access to our expert Slack chat, and everything we have to offer for NFL DFS showdown and single game contests. New this year to the package as well is the projected ownership and optimal lineup possibilities for tiered contests on DraftKings. Head over to the Awesemo Plus join page and pick your pass up now for $3.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. Back into the video, we got a guy who had an explosive game in week number 1. Hollywood Brown of the Baltimore Ravens going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. Hollywood Brown looked good up against the Raiders on Monday Night Football, going 6 for 6 for 69 yards. Very nice for Mr. Hollywood Brown, and a tug in that game. But This is a story we've seen before. A story we have seen play out for the last couple of years with Hollywood Brown. He has this big game, this explosive game, and then the next week you're like, holy fuck, I drafted him and it's actually going to work out, and then the next week, he just leaves you out to dry. And then, you sit him. And then the next week, he blows up. He has that great game. And you're like, holy fuck, now we got to fire up the cannons there for Hollywood Brown. Let's start him again. And then guess what happens? You start him, and then he plays like shit. And then he has like 10 straight games of being terrible. And then he's great again. He's a very inconsistent player. So, with that said, if he has a big game here up against the Chiefs, I would not be surprised. But I think week in and week out, Hollywood Brown is a very unreliable player and could likely fade into irrelevancy because his bad games, it's not like 9 points, right? Where maybe you can salvage a win if you start Hollywood Brown, but his bad games are like 4 points, where he just completely decimates your roster. Final must-sit player is Tyler Boyd of the Cincinnati Bengals going up against the Chicago Bears. Tyler Boyd appeared to be a huge benefactor going into week 1 because Ja'Marr Chase was having the dropsies. He couldn't catch the ball all preseason and training camp. They're talking about how he can't get any separation. Basically, every sign was pointing towards Ja'Marr Chase having an awful game up against the Vikings. But then seemingly, out of nowhere, like an RKO from Randy Orton, Ja'Marr Chase learned how to catch. And he caught greatly. 5 receptions on 7 targets for 101 receiving yards and a touchdown up against the Vikings. This left Boyd kind of screwed over. 3 receptions on 4 targets for 32 receiving yards. If Chase is able to continue to have this strong stranglehold of the target share in this offense for the Bengals, then it's going to be hard to start Boyd weekly, especially up against a tougher defensive matchup in the Bears. So I'm definitely going to be sitting him down this week. So thank you guys all so much for watching this video. Again, please make sure you guys check out Yahoo. Get those 2 free months of Awesemo Plus Platinum with your first Yahoo DFS deposit. I love you guys so much. Make sure to follow me again on Twitter at NotoriousFNTSY. Stay safe. I love you guys as always. Goodbye.